Hey core creators, this is Mordecai from Team Meta. In this video, we're going to be going over what the funnel analytics module is, how to best implement it into your game, and some brief technicals on how it actually works. So first off, what is the funnel analytics module? The funnel analytics module allows you to track various steps that new players take in your game. So if I am inside of my game and I press F9, it will bring up the funnel analytics dashboard, and I'll do a brief overview of what all this means. So first off, we can see that there's this ID. This simply is the number of the step, and I will go into details on how to actually modify these so it actually works or makes sense with your game. The step name, this is basically some brief information that only you as the creator can see. This allows you to know what this step is inside of the code. We have the not completed column. So this is currently we have 4 people or 4 players in our sample size. So there's 4 total in here. 3 of them have not completed step 1. 1 of them have completed step 1. And so the complete percentage is currently 25%. Now you can see that at step 2, the plant crop as an example, all 4 players have not completed this step. And so this delta here is negative 25% from the previous step. So as you can see down here, because this one is NA, it's technically 0%. The upgrade shovel, 25% of players have quote unquote upgraded their shovel, and the delta is positive 25%. A few other things to note here is up at the top, this estimated, as you begin to collect some data, as time goes by, the system is set up to try and estimate how many days it will take for an experiment to actually complete. There's also a test progress bar that will fill up as data is collected. So the idea of this tool is not only can you see how players are interacting with your game with various steps that you're tracking, but it also allows you to test or track the actual day 1 retention. So down here on step 24, you'll want to leave step 24 defaulted to D1 player returns. And what happens is if a new player joins your game and then they leave and come back between 24 hours and 48 hours of their first session time, they will count as a day 1 retention player. And so this step is only completed if they return it in that window. And if they do, you'll begin to start seeing under current D1 the actual percentage of your new players thus far, what the average percent of the D1 retention is. And that's what this test progress is set up for. So as an example, if we had set the test to collect based on 10 players, after 10 new players joined your game, 48 hours after their initial login, it would then track which one of those players or how many of those players came back and played your game again, and it would set the day 1 retention. And once that is completed, that's when your test progress is 100%. And like I said, this estimated will show how many days is expected based on your current player count per day on how long this test will take. A few other things to note here is down at the bottom here, we have this A plus B. So it's going to be a little difficult to show based on bots and preview mode, but what this does is it takes based on the player's ID, it will actually put your players in 2 groups that you could then use to split test. So for example, I believe all bots default to A. So if I switch to A, this is A group step stats. So what this allows you to do is in the actual code, you could determine when a player joins your game, what group they're going to be in, and you can actually split test different stuff in your game. So as an example, say that you wanted to test if the tutorial UI just automatically popping it up is a good idea or not. Well, instead of trying to decide as a creator which one's best, you can actually test both. So as an example, maybe group A automatically sees the tutorial UI, while group B has to click a hotkey to actually see the tutorial UI. And then based on that, you can actually swap between these and see how that little change is impacting the performance of your game. And you can do that for all the various steps. A lot of it will come down to only doing client-side stuff, but you could even, for example, if you wanted, have Group B get more resources at the start of their game, or stuff like that. Maybe give them a specific weapon that only one group gets. You do want to be careful of this, because if two players are friends and they're in different groups and one of them has a really good weapon and the other for whatever reason didn't, they're not going to understand that, and that might be a bad experience. So usually with this split testing, I keep it to mostly client-side stuff, UI elements and stuff like that, but you're free to do whatever you want with it. The other thing you could see is there's this player breakdown. So if you click on this button, you can see that here are the current players that are in that I've tracked. And so once again, the ID is just the amount. So player 1 is bot 1, ID 1, etc. You can see all the steps. So a 1 means that they completed it, a 0 means that they haven't. This is, I know that this is a bit difficult to understand, but it correlates in order with, if we go back to this, step 1, step 2, step 3. The main one that's important is the session time. So the session time only tracks the session time of the first time they join your game. So if they leave and come back, it only counts that first session time. And this allows you to understand how long the majority of players are staying in your game. And if you see someone that stayed in your game a long time, you could go back and kind of reference, what steps did they do? Did they skip certain steps? Did they do all of them? That's where this comes in handy, is kind of identifying outliers on why one player had a larger session time or maybe a lower session time. As you can see, this one's 13 seconds. Obviously, this is just a test in preview mode, but you can kind of get the idea. So this is the overview of how to actually use the dashboard and everything that you need to know on it. But how do we actually set this system up? So we're going to go ahead and exit out of preview mode here. And when you first download from community content the funnel analytics system, you'll see that there's this funnel stat tracker, and there's also the funnel stats readme. So the funnel stats tracker is the entire component. So if you click on the actual group, you'll see a few custom properties. So first off, right on the root of funnel stats tracker, we have the analytics panel keybind. So this is currently defaulted to F9. You're welcome to change this to whatever you want. This keybind by default is enabled for everyone. So the is dev mode, if this is checked, I only use this when I'm actually in development, testing. And why this is checked is it turns off what's called the admin check. And so this allows all your bots and everything to access the actual dashboard without having to add them to the admin list. So when you do go to publish your game, you will want to uncheck this. And what this does is it disables it for everyone. And then under this admin list, it will only allow player IDs that are inside of this admin list to access the actual panel. So the other thing you'll want to know is to actually set up a test. It does rely on leaderboards. And so if you go to Window, Global Leaderboards, you'll want to make sure that this is actually in your core creator. So you can see this window, Global Leaderboards. And you can see that I have this funnel leaderboard here. It's set to 10 entries. And so what I would do is I create this. I simply drag it onto funnel leaderboard as a custom property. And then the entries that I have it set to is 10. You want to make sure that the entries of this leaderboard matches with the funnel sample size here, which is 10. So you could also, you will also need to actually delete the leaderboard once a test is complete. So say that you ran your first test, you understand the actual, your players, how they're interacting with your game with that current test. If you did want to reset that data, what you would need to do is you would need to delete the leaderboard. You would need to create a new one. And then based on how many ranked entries, so say that you wanted to track 200 in your sample size this time, I would just name this, funnel test 2 as an example. So funnel test 2, 200 entries. So I drag it here onto the funnel leaderboard, and I would change this funnel sample size to 200. And now if I join, we press F9, we can see that there's now 1 in my sample size. And that's because I'm the only player that has joined. So that's how you reset a test. So if I go ahead and close this, open this back up. So that's the primary things that you'll want to change on just how the dashboard works. But now we need to go into how to actually name your steps. So what you'll want to do is under your funnel module server, so it's under server context, funnel module, there is the funnel steps data as a required file. So if we click the pencil here, it will open it up. And currently this uses just a table. If creators are requesting it, I could set this up to use hierarchy data as well. But for now, this is relatively simple. So you just open up the funnel steps data, and I made it so the table, you can know it correlates with the steps. So this is starting on line 22, it creates this table, and on line 24 is the name. So currently the table does not use description or value. This is for future functionality. And so all you need to do is name the steps to correlate with where it is in your code and how it's tracking it. So what I mean by that is if step 1 is going to track if a player has actually opened your tutorial UI, you need to make sure that this step correlates with it actually tracking that. So for example, say that we wanted to, track them starting a quest, started first quest. This is just an example. And so if I save this and now I open up preview mode again, press F9, and you can see started first quest. So once again, this is only visible to whoever has access to this panel. And so it's really just information for you. So you can name it whatever you want. Just make sure that all the steps correlate. So that brings us into our next point, is how do we actually track a step? And so by keeping this open, so step 1 started first quest. If we open this trigger here, I have some sample code. And so how this module is set up is you will need to know a bit of code. So to actually track a step, you just do the global variable. So it's g.funnel set player step complete. You have to pass the player object as the first parameter, and then you simply pass the step ID. So instead of naming it step ID to give you a visual, you could just do 1. And so by passing 1, it would track when that function is fired, it would track that the first step here is complete, which is started first quest. And so how this works is you don't really need to worry about this firing off multiple times because it just sets it to complete. And so once it's already completed, it doesn't do anything. It automatically has a check. And one thing to note here is this works on both client and server. Now, if you are on the client, the API is set up to automatically do a server broadcast, so you will want to be careful on how many things you're tracking or how quickly they will be tracked on the actual client. But for things like toggling UI and stuff like that, in most cases you will be fine because the client has access to be able to do 10 broadcasts to the server. And so by doing this, it works once again on both client and server. And so to kind of dig into the technicals here, let me zoom this out a little bit. Under the funnel module, so under funnel stats tracker, server context, funnel module server. So there's funnel module server, which is the server side API. And then there's funnel module client, which is the client side API. And so if you want to kind of dig in, all of the actual public API is down at the bottom of the code here. So public functions. And so we can see that I've set up a few of these that allows you to do various things. So first off, this gfunnel step set player step complete. This is what we just discussed. You can also get all of the player steps table. So a lot of these you won't need to worry about too much. It will mostly just be the set player step complete and getting the player test group. And so the get player test group, what this does is it returns if they're either in group A or group B, as I discussed earlier. Group A will return an ID of 1 or an int of 1. Group B will return an int of 2. And so this will allow you to, so for example, say I took this and you wanted to do an if statement, you could just do if equals 1, then it would actually track that. And so by setting this up, only group A would track this step if they actually did this functionality right here. And so this is more of an advanced component. Mostly you'll want to focus on doing the tracking, but this is also set up to allow you to do the split testing. So the other thing to note here is there is a lot going on with this. As I've mentioned a few times, this is a more advanced component. However, how it's tracking all this data is if we go into, well, first of all, I need to actually track some steps real quick. So I'll just click on these triggers and I've completed some steps. So now I'll exit back out. I can go to File, Show Project in Explorer, go to Temp, go to Leaderboards, and here's my new leaderboard. And so this is how it's tracking. So the score format is actually tracking as an integer. And this is all of the steps data. And so to kind of go into detail on how this works, if we go into the binary table converter, which is a required file of either the funnel module or funnel module client, and we click this pencil here, we can see that this is how it's actually converting the binary to decimal and decimal to binary. And I actually have a helpful resource here up at the top of this code. So if we press Control and click it, go ahead and open this. And so what this is if we do decimal to binary and we paste in the decimal that we had as a score and we convert it, we'll see that our binary number here is a bunch of zeros, ones. So these are the steps, and then a bunch of zeros again. And so this is how we are tracking the 24 steps. And so every time someone completes a step, it changes that step to a 1. And then when it goes to save to the leaderboard, it then converts this binary into a decimal. So if we go to binary and switch it to decimal, and I paste this in here, we'll see that our decimal number is 64,512. And so if I change it by adding as if the player completed another step and we convert it, we now see that the decimal number is much larger. But if we switch it back from decimal to binary, we'll see that that first step was completed. So this is kind of basic, but this is how it's currently tracking. And one thing I do want to say is shout out to Standard Combo. He was the one that came up with the idea of this, and it was very helpful because I would have never thought of doing this. And so currently with there is a few limitations. We can only get this binary number up to a certain point, and then we just simply can't track it as a score, because as you've seen, just adding one step made the actual decimal number very, very large, and there is a cap. And so that's why we're only able to track 24 steps currently. If you try to go up to 25 steps, just a warning, it will break. In the future, I will try and get this to be able to go to a higher number, but that is essentially what we're limited to for now. And I did put that warning. And so just as a quick overview, that's where this limit comes in. It will not allow it to go over 24 steps. The other thing that this module comes with is the date time tracking module. Now, leaderboards also allow us to track some extra data. Sorry, I'm jumping all over. Let's go to File, go to Temp, Leaderboards, this one. So this additional data, all of this is tracking the date and the session time of the player. So if we go back to the date time tracking module, this session, this is 999,000, or it's 9,999. What this is how many seconds that you could track as a session. And so I believe this is like 2 hours and 45 minutes right up here. And so basically to compress this as much as possible, or at least as far as I could think to compress it, it essentially compresses, it uses day, it uses a year day. And so we go back to this real quick. The year day is the first thing. So today is the 21st of December, 2020. And so it is the 356th day of the year. And so that is how we're getting the current date. This is hour. And so it originally timestamped this at the 18th hour of the day. Now this is in UTC. And so 6 hours from now will be 4 p.m. and that's when it will actually reset. And then these last 4 digits here are the session time in seconds. So as I said, you could track up to 2 hours and 45 minutes of session time. Past that, it just caps out at that 9999. And so if you see a lot of players that are at the 2 hours and 45 minute mark, it's not that they're falling off at that specific time. It just simply means it can't track any higher. So just know that those players likely stayed longer, but they at least stayed that amount of time. So that is pretty much the main things to know about this. Like I said, if you kind of want to dig into it, the funnel module client is the entire API for the client side. So a lot of this you won't need to deal with. It's all coded. The main one you need is to track the actual step. And to get the test group. So I'll actually put this one right here. And I will actually try and comment these out a bit better so you understand, but basically at the very bottom of the code are the ones that you'll want to use. And once again, in funnel module, the server side, same thing is true. Test group, set player step complete. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, please message Mordecai #0001 on Discord, or just find me in the core Discord and send me a message if you have any questions, or if you need more information on how to do something. So once again, this module is more of an advanced component. It's really set up for creators to really better understand how players are interacting with their game, to make informed decisions on how to actually improve their game, test those changes, and see if their theory actually did improve the new user experience. Because if you get a larger retention of new players in your game, that slowly will compound and your game will grow in numbers, simply because you're not losing as many new players. They're not forgetting about your game. They're actually sticking around and playing. So once again, hopefully this was helpful, and I shall catch you next time.